We take a look at Raiders' fourth-round pick Donte Thornton Jr. and Cody Lindenberg, the seventh-round pick linebacker from Minnesota, on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast as our Best Of series rolls for Wednesday, June 25th, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Definitely appreciate you. If you're catching the show wherever you find your favorite podcast, or you're checking us out by way of the YouTube page, you know we appreciate both. Show grows each and every day because of your consistent support and the great job that my man Ari does behind the scenes, making sure we look good and sound good. We shout him out. We appreciate him. Does a fantastic job. Check him out. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And normally we have the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line for you at 707-654-4693. We will get back to your calls and texts. We'll do that next week when we get back to the normal programming that we have. But right now, doing a little vacation time, the 1 week a year that we do the vacation. So going to do that. We'll get back to regular programming next week. And so we're doing a little best of series as we roll on throughout the course of this week. And so today, we'll take a look at Donte Thornton Jr., the fourth-round pick out of Tennessee, and we'll look at Cody Lindenberg, seventh-round pick linebacker out of Minnesota. And oh, by the way, as a little bit of a bonus, we'll also take a look at undrafted free agent Jah Joyner, also from Minnesota. So Chase Thomas from the Chase Thomas podcast, he actually was the first one up. So you'll hear from him right now in segment number one of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, talking about the guy that's been catching a lot of attention when it comes to the Raiders. Got a lot of attention in OTAs, got a lot more attention in mandatory minicamp. Looks like the Raiders do have some pretty good plans for Donte Thornton Jr. Learn all about him right now with my guy, Chase Thomas from the Chase Thomas podcast here on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Check it out. Chase, thanks so much for your time. Definitely appreciate you. So we know that Dante is fast and we know that he is tall. What kind of element or how did he help really open up that Josh Heupel offense with being able to have those kind of elements, those tools on his tool belt?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. So Donte Thornton is a little bit different. I heard Rhett talk about the comparison between Dante and Jalin Hyatt in 22. I think it's fair in some capacity, but I think it's a little bit different with Dante. Dante started out in the slot like Jalin last year before moving to the outside primarily this year. And at 6'5", and with his kind of speed, he's a little bit more versatile, I think, coming into the league than Jalin Hyatt a couple of years ago. And I think he probably has a better chance of seeing the field earlier just with the Vegas wide receiver room as of right now. But one of the things that I think stood out about Dante was that when you watch Tennessee games last year in particular, games where Dante was not able to get a lot of snaps or Dante was taken out, Tennessee did not win those games. Tennessee, if you look at the three losses last year, the Arkansas game, the Ohio State game, and the Georgia game, Donte Thornton was not a factor. And Donte Thornton, in particular against the Vanderbilt game, so for any Raiders fans who want to see what he can do and take the top off the ball against opposing defenses, it's the Vanderbilt game, the final regular season game where he had two big yak plays in that game to get Tennessee back into it after a slow start on the road against their rivals. So I think Dante, if I had to compare the two with him and Hyatt, I think he has a better chance of developing sooner rather than later at the next level. And I think his versatility between being somebody who can be on the inside and the outside kind of separates him a little bit. And I think that versatility will benefit him in Vegas.
How difficult is it, in your opinion, for guys to translate and kind of develop from the Josh Heupel offense to all of a sudden an NFL offense that seems to be at least a lot more difficult to be able to pick up?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Tennessee has to continue to deal with in recruiting. But I think when you look at Jalin Hyatt, he hasn't been able to crack the rotation with the Giants. But if you look at Cedric Tillman, he's really found his footing in Cleveland on the outside, and he was more of an outside guy, more in the Thornton role. So for me, I think obviously the route tree is not as expansive as it is in other locations, but I also just think that's a little bit overblown because these guys also run a lot of routes, different kind of route trees in the high school level, and Heupel is expanding his route tree a little bit more each and every year. Like, for instance, Tennessee went up 12 personnel, pretty heavy last year, so they were doing a lot more tight end sets and not doing a traditional slot guy as much. So I think, guys, if you're talented, you'll figure it out. And these guys, like Donte Thornton, is someone who will figure it out, just like Tillman figured it out. Velus Jones was used all over the place. If you remember in 21 and 22, or 21 rather, for Tennessee, he's been able to hang around the NFL too. You just look, I think with guys like Thornton in particular, they're going to be able to make plays and be big guys and guys who will be able to run different routes than they were asked to do at Tennessee, because these guys are super talented and they'll figure it out. So I think that's a little bit overblown.
Talking all things Donte Thornton Jr. right now, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, round 4 pick by the Silver and Black, with our guy Chase Thomas Podcast here on Raider Nation Radio 920 Unnecessary Roughness. So for his game to continue to grow, we know he's got the size, we know he's got the speed, and that's a great step to have and a great first element to have in the NFL. But for his game to grow, where do you think that he needs to improve the most?
I think he has to, for one, stay healthy. I think you got to look at his snap counts. One of the things that's going to be really important for Dante at the next level, I think, is just being able to be available. His availability was kind of iffy last year, and I think that was one of the reasons that Tennessee, when their passing game really slumped last year, was when Dante just wasn't able to give them a lot of snaps. So that's something that's a big thing for Dante, is just being able to handle a high snap count, high load. Because you look at that depth chart in Vegas, and I think he has a lot of opportunity there. He's just got to stay healthy, because when he is healthy, he is a really productive player. I think he's really good over the middle. I think he's really good, obviously, on vertical balls. Like, one of his best plays last year was just a go ball against Alabama in the second half. It was one of the best passing plays for Tennessee on the season, with him and Nico down the right-hand side, and he just laid out. It was a great play. I think for him, it's, like you said, it's kind of the top, of just different kind of route trees that he has not been asked to do as much, and also just see if he can handle NFL contact and see what he does after contact, because a lot of his stuff is just when he beats his guy, you're just not catching him, like against Vanderbilt or Oklahoma, for instance. He had a couple of those plays. So he's great in space, but I also am just kind of curious how he handles contact at the next level.
Competing is what Pete Carroll's all about, is compete. When it comes to just all-around competition and maybe being the first one in, last one out, where would you say Dante is in that regards?
He's one of my favorite things about Dante is, like, certain guys where they see themselves as slot guys or outside guys, or they want to go where they're comfortable. And I think Dante being able to play and start off in the slot, where he clearly was not as comfortable as he was on the outside, he went with it until they moved him outside. And he's a competitor and a gamer, and just definitely a well-liked guy in the locker room. And I think he's someone who just will catch on wherever he goes. And I think his speed and work ethic is strong. And I would not be surprised that Donte Thornton is a really good player with the Raiders and with Pete Carroll and what he's looking for over the top, because I think his kind of athleticism and his kind of size and speed after the catch is just those guys they're not easily found in this league.
Right, exactly. It feels like that it was created in a lab. To be that size and to be as fast as he is, it's really unheard of. A lot of people are drawing comparisons to DK Metcalf, who obviously Pete Carroll worked with in Seattle for quite a while. I've heard some interviews from Dante where he's basically saying, hey, a lot of people have things wrong about me. What kind of chip on his shoulder does he have? Is he one of those guys that kind of pushes himself based off of having a little bit of chip on his shoulder, when people may categorize him as maybe a one-trick pony when it comes to a certain style of play, and he's out to prove that he can do more than that?
I think that's just that might be the thing with Tennessee's receivers, just because of what you were talking about, with just what they're hearing with just the route tree, and what you're hearing with Tillman. You had Ramel Keaton last year, another Tennessee guy who played a lot of different roles for Tennessee. I think those guys, and just the kind of guys that Heupel and Kelsey Pope, the receivers coach, who they recruit and bring in and develop, they're all pretty versatile guys and all great leaders, whether it's McCoy, whether it's Keaton, whether it's Dante. I wouldn't count them out, and I think they definitely naturally have a chip on their shoulder, because they do, I'm sure, hear the noise about Heupel's scheme, and some people calling it a gimmicky type offense. The production speaks for itself. His 4.3 speaks for itself, and I think he's a competent guy with just what he's put on tape. The main thing is just he's got to stay on the field. Mm-hmm. He's got to get the snaps, and he's got to hold up, because if he can, then I think he's got a huge opportunity with the Raiders and with Pete Carroll. But he's got he's got to also bulk up. I've seen the DK Metcalf comparisons too, and I just the size, he's got to add a lot more weight
right.
to get to that point. But you also kind of wonder if that's even a route you want to go, because he's so quick and he's so good in space that you don't want to bulk up too much and lose some of that speed that makes him just a dangerous player whenever he gets the ball in his hands.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. It's a fine line, right? I mean, you don't want to lose that speed. You do want to bulk up so you can take the physicality of the NFL. So that's definitely something that he's got to work on. It's funny talking about the Josh Heupel offense. Chase, I spent a lot of time in Central Texas, so I covered Baylor when Art Briles was there, and it's always comparisons. Like the Briles offense is similar to the Heupel offense, where these guys are just open, right? And they use every inch of grass out there on the field to maximize it and make their their offenses really go and make it so dangerous. What is like the biggest misconception in your mind about the Josh Heupel offense that most people probably talk about?
I mean, you guessed it. I mean, you nailed it with the wide splits. I mean, that definitely helped things. But I think one of the things that people talk about is just it's this vertical passing game. And it's just not kind of how I talked about the 12 personnel that Heupel had to use a lot last year. The tackles just were not very good for Tennessee. And to protect Nico from the Oklahoma game on, they were basically living in 12 personnel. And that is not what Heupel wants to do. So I think Heupel doesn't get enough credit for evolving to his personnel. It's not like he's just going to run the 2022 style offense where Jalen Hyatt is just wide open 3 to 4 times a game, and Hendon Hooker is just able to hit him wide open in stride. That was a unique situation in 22, but you also had a much better offensive line. Darnell Wright at right tackle, he's a top 10 pick, and there was just a lot of different circumstances that kind of led to Tennessee having that special season in 22. But I think in particular what people misconstrue about Heupel, and why I think Browns fans are going to be happy with Dylan Sampson in a couple of rounds later from Thornton, is that they run the football. This is a smash mouth team. This is a team that was top 10 in the country in running the football this past year. They block really well. Their guards and center play, you could argue, is more important than their tackles with how their offense is built. And they run block extremely well. They value the run. Heupel is very much a big proponent of running the football. And it was one of the biggest reasons that Tennessee made the college football playoff this year was the leadership of Dylan Sampson and that combination of Donte Thornton with a couple of splash chunk plays and then just running the ball against some really good competition. They ran it well, and they've averaged around 5 yards per carry all 4 years under Heupel at Tennessee. So I think that's one of the biggest misnomers, is that Tennessee is just this passing air raid type scheme, and it's just not. Tennessee is a run-first team that takes their deep shots when they can. There's all you needed to know right there from Chase Thomas from the Chase Thomas podcast, really breaking it down. Donte Thornton Jr., the 4th-round pick out of Tennessee, and he's a guy, man, 6'5", 4'3", right? What else do you need to say? I keep calling him DK Metcalf without the big muscles like DK, but he's that big play maker that Seattle had, and I think now Dante is going to have an opportunity as long as he can stay healthy, as long as he can learn the complete route tree. Again, it's a little challenging coming from Tennessee. You heard Chase break that down there in segment number 1. But Dante's got an opportunity. He really does. And if he could become that big playmaker for this Geno Smith-led offense, really good things could happen for this offense. We talked quite a bit about it, but, man, that could be a game changer if he could turn into that guy. Obviously, Trey Tucker is still there as well. You use his speed, and you use it to your best advantage as well if you're Chip Kelly, the offensive coordinator. So coming up in segment number 2, Daniel House, Golden Gophers Guru. We'll talk all things Cody Lindenberg, 7th-round pick, the linebacker from Minnesota. We'll do that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to learn all things Cody Lindenberg, the linebacker from Minnesota, 7th-round pick. Daniel House from the Golden Gophers Guru. He joined my radio show right after the draft to talk about all his highs and his lows, where he needs to improve, what he does really well, talks leadership, broke it on down, all things Cody Lindenberg. This guy does a really good job covering the Minnesota football program like a glove. So here's part 1 of the conversation. You'll hear about the 7th-round pick, Cody Lindenberg. Check it out. Daniel House, founder of GophersGuru.com, joins us now on the phone lines. And Daniel, thanks so much for your time. Definitely appreciate you. So you heard what Cody had to say coming in about his style of play. For Raider Nation that may not be familiar with Lindenberg, when you see him out there on the field playing that linebacker role, how would you describe the way that he gets after it?
Active, instinctive linebacker, great at blading through blocks on the perimeter, good burst and lateral quickness side to side. He has a track background, and you can see some of those components shine through in his game. Good length on his frame, and, he can deconstruct blocks quite well. And I think one of the things he touched on in the intro there is just the preparation side of it, the work ethic. He puts in work to pick up on tips and tendencies to just help him gain an edge. I mean, when you're a step ahead of the offense, the angles change in your favor, and that's something he's really embraced and improved over his career. So I think the biggest thing with him is just staying healthy. When he's out there and healthy, his presence was felt, and he can give you some value on special teams. You look at the linebacker room for the Raiders right now, at least a rotational role is on the table based on what they have available on the depth chart right now.
You mentioned the health, and, when you look back at what he did when he arrived in Minnesota in 2020, he played 6 games, then he played 3 games, then he had a season of 13 games, and then he only played 4 games, and then last year played 12 games. Is it just all about, for him, just staying healthy because we see the lack of just even game participation because of those injuries that he suffered?
Yeah, I'd say it's just staying on the field because when he's been out there, he's been able to contribute, and his presence is felt when he walks out there. I look at the scheme, Patrick Graham, what he loves to do, just rolling coverages in different directions. You'll see him show cover 0 and bluff out into cover 2 with a simulated pressure, and sometimes he'll show that presentation of pressure and double A gap where the linebackers drop too. So I think some of the things that Cody Lindenberg did schematically at Minnesota, playing underneath zones in cover 3, working along the line of scrimmage and dropping. He gained a lot of comfort in that area last year just with what Minnesota did schematically. So you look at that combined with the pure blitzes and the simulated and creeper pressures, I think Lindenberg's comfortable in all those areas, so the transition should be pretty smooth entering Patrick Graham's scheme.
Daniel House is with us here, founder of GophersGuru.com, and right now we're talking about 7th-round pick Cody Lindenberg and what he was able to do at Minnesota and what he could possibly be doing with the silver and black. And something that stands out to me is the tackles for loss, the TFLs, 5 last year, an interception, and also 6 passes defense. It felt like, as you kind of alluded to, he got more comfortable in the scheme and became more instinctual. Is that something that you would say that he kind of has some really good instincts out there?
You look at last year, they were transitioning to a similar scheme, but a little bit different elements with Joe Rossi, their previous defensive coordinator, going to Michigan State. They had Corey Heatherman take over, and I felt like as the season progressed and he gained more comfort in what they were asking him to do style-wise within the scheme, getting used to how it was deployed, being that voice of the defense, the green dot guy for Minnesota, you just saw his comfort grow. Him just getting his feet back underneath him, like you say, didn't play as much the previous year. So just getting out there and developing the feel for it again, I thought he really expanded. From a pressure standpoint, being, able to blitz a little bit, do some things in that game, I thought that expanded some elements of what he can do in his skill set. And, when I looked at situations coming into the draft, just based on who was on people's depth charts, late round made a lot of sense for the Raiders, just both schematic fit-wise and what they had on their depth chart. I feel like Cody can challenge for playing time, give some value on special teams, and you kind of look with the bridge 1-year signings in that linebacker room. He definitely is someone you could develop for the future.
What were your expectations as far as when you thought that he was going to be drafted based off what you've seen him do at Minnesota?
I felt like he was right about where he, ended up because just the injury history piece, being able to stay healthy is the biggest thing. And I felt like you look at the athletic testing, I believe he had a sports hernia surgery leading into the pre-draft process, so that might have impacted testing just a little bit. So you look at all the pieces coming together, him being healthy, integrating into the system. I feel comfortable when he's at his best, optimal, 100%. He can give you starter level value.
Daniel, you mentioned, he was the green dot guy there. So he was obviously the guy giving out the communication, letting the guys know how to line up and, basically being that coach on the field. What does that say to you about his leadership skills and what he's able to do out there at that linebacker position?
Oh, that's everything. That's the core element of watching Cody and being around him over the years is just the ability to communicate and rally everybody on the defense. He just developed a deep knowledge for how the system is put together, not just his role, but everybody around him. And that's why he was able to eventually become that green dot player and a pivotal voice on the defense. I mean, you look at his journey. He played at Anoka High School, which is in the north of the Twin Cities, and staying home, playing for the Gophers. He became a player that, fans really gravitated towards just because he was a local guy, and really started to just become a core player over the course of time, a big-time leader in the program. And now, he's going to bring that high-character personality to Las Vegas. I know he's going to dial in and, do everything that he needs to do to pick it up.
The funny thing about it is, and he sounds like so many other the players that the Raiders drafted, Pete Carroll and John Spytek, who's the GM, they continue to tell us that they want guys that are going to go compete at all costs and also love football. Like, if you don't love football, that's fine. There's a place for you in the NFL. There's not a place for you with this Raiders team. It sounds like Cody checks both those boxes when it comes to loving football and is willing to compete at anything.
Absolutely, and just a really good athlete. I mean, I remember I was at a camp early on in the process when he was, trying to get offers and get recruited, and you could just feel that side-to-side range and pursuit ability. And, he's on the track scene a lot. There's a big story on the website just about how he just basically told his parents after a baseball tournament, hey, I got to go to a track competition. He goes out there. He's never worked in the track events at all, puts his hand down and goes and wins a track event. Like, he's just a natural athlete all the way around. And so, betting on him and his character and what he brings to the table athletically, if he can stay healthy, he's definitely going to be a very solid contributor for the Raiders.
Cody Lindenberg is the guy that I do believe the Raiders like. I just, from seeing him at mandatory minicamp, OTAs, hearing about him, I do believe that they like him. I also think that they like what they have in the veteran linebackers right now, in Landon Roberts. Obviously, they've got Devin White. They just brought in Jermaine Pratt as well. So I think that those three guys, being the veterans, are going to be able to make it easier to slide a Lindenberg in there when he's ready, right? It doesn't make him have to go into action immediately. You've got leadership. You've got guys that have been there, done that, have had success in the league, and so they're going to try to coach up the young guys, right? Tommy Eichenberg is still part of the mix. Lindenberg obviously is part of the mix. Amari Gaynor is still part of the mix, but they're not forced into action and have to play a big role on this Raiders defense right away. But it'll allow these guys to get in there special teams wise, do what they've got to do, and then when it's time to take over and be on the field as a defender, then they'll get their real opportunity. But from everything I've heard, the Raiders do like Lindenberg a lot. Now, again, it's not training camp yet. They haven't put the pads on. You haven't seen the physicality yet. So he's going to have to, learn his role. He's also going to have to stay healthy, something that he struggled with at Minnesota. But I do think he has an opportunity. You just won't see a lot of him, I think, early on in the regular season. Coming up in segment number 3, the conversation with Daniel House rolls on. But now we talk about undrafted free agent, the edge rusher, Jah Joyner. Many people were surprised that he went undrafted, but the Raiders were able to swoop him up. They're pretty excited about him as well. You'll hear what Jah Joyner brings to the table coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors here on the show, and that is Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's so easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. And they've got some great insights. And all of a sudden, it'll really surprise you when you start looking at the app and looking at all the numbers and seeing where all your money goes. And you're like, wait, hold on. I spent that much on food delivery? Yeah, you spent that much on food delivery. You don't need multiple apps. So you can use Monarch Money to check your finances, track spending, even plan your long-term goals. It's a one-stop shop. Right now, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's all one word at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to continue the conversation we had with Daniel House, Golden Gophers Guru. He was a guest on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, Raider Nation Radio 920, shortly after the draft to talk about all guys drafted, all 11 players that were drafted by the Silver and Black. Daniel obviously didn't break down all 11, but he was on the radio show to go into deep dive into the rookie class so we can learn, more about these guys from guys that are boots on the ground and cover them like a glove. Segment number 2, you heard him talking about Cody Lindenberg. Now, we also want to talk about the edge rusher, Jah Joyner, undrafted free agent. And we go into a little bit deeper into what the Raiders are trying to do as a team as well. Here's part 2 of that conversation with Daniel House from Golden Gophers Guru. Now, another guy from Minnesota that the Raiders signed was available as an undrafted free agent, which to me was kind of surprising, as Jah Joyner, the defensive end. Was that just me being surprised, or was that a surprise to you that he was available as an undrafted guy?
Yeah, that was a surprise for me. I mean, watching him play, I felt like the translation to the NFL, just from a traits and physical standpoint, when Jah walks in the room, he jumps out. I mean, long arms, 82.5-inch wingspan, grew up out in Connecticut, took it first year at Minnesota to just kind of develop, get stronger, really wanted to do that. He wanted to invest and learn and not get thrown out there right away, playing in college football. But you look at it, great first step, nice mix of clubs, rips, swims off the edge, lots of balls knocked down at the line of scrimmage just because of his length. And when he gets to the top of rushes, he can stretch out, strip quarterbacks at the top of rushes just because of that wingspan. He always reminded me a little bit of a young Jason Pierre-Paul from a frame and testing standpoint. Go look at the testing and go look at the metrics and measurements, what they ended up being, relative athletic score. Jah comes in at 6.87, Jason Pierre-Paul at 6.67, and both had 34-inch arms, similar testing profiles. I'm not saying that that's a career arc necessarily,
right,
but it's pretty eerie how their testing and measurements stacked up.
You mentioned him knocking down balls at the line of scrimmage, and he had officially 7 passes defense last season there at Minnesota. What was it? How did he learn that trait? Because obviously it was a big skill set that he had last year.
I thought a lot of it was just how Minnesota was playing schematically, rolling coverages a lot, trying to pin the quarterback into the pocket and impede vision lanes. They're really turning the corners, and, if you can't get to the quarterback, get your hands up. And with that long wingspan, he's able to get a lot of balls batted down, have those type of plays where, the offense isn't gaining any yardage, the dead plays along with the negative plays where he was disruptive as well. I thought, production-wise, from a pressure standpoint, he might have dipped just a little bit just based on that schematic style. Minnesota really wanted the Russian coverage working well together, and that involved pinning the pocket and, trying to get your hands up and affect the quarterback, and then lead to some, tip balls, takeaways, those type of things.
Well, he had, 12 sacks the last 2 years there in Minnesota. So 12 sacks and, multiple tackles for loss and 4 forced fumbles. So obviously there's plenty of production there. Where would you say that Jah needs to continue to develop his game?
I just think it's going to be, the versatility of his game. I feel like there's some stuff that Patrick Graham can unlock, moving him around a little bit for matchups, in specific situations. You just look at what Graham has done in the past schematically, being able to get matchups for guys. I think Jah can unlock a little bit more in his game. You can get him involved in the stunt game a little bit too. I'm just fascinated to see, what Graham does with him, because I think he's got a lot of developmental potential just waiting to be unlocked. I mean, the athletic and physical traits are there. It's just going to be, the technical piece continuing to grow there. I thought over the course of his career, you saw him develop more of an arsenal of pass rush moves that he's able to set up over the course of games. So, when you have a guy with, this type of frame and physical gifts, he's the type of guy you want to invest in. I mean, you look at the undrafted free agent contract, he got $150,000 guaranteed money. So, obviously they felt like he was someone that they wanted to, target in the undrafted process.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Like I said, when I saw that he signed, I was like, whoa, hold on. And I had to make sure that I wasn't wrong. I was like, wait, I didn't expect him to go undrafted. So I feel like that's a really good pickup by the Raiders. And, looking at Jah, looking at Cody, both guys stayed at Minnesota throughout the whole course of their career. And we know college football, we know what it's like now, Daniel. It's not like that. Guys transfer like in the middle of the night, it seems like they're transferring all the time. What was it that made these guys stay there at Minnesota and not transfer out?
Well, I feel like that's just something that, Minnesota valued player retention, retaining guys that they had developed over the course of time. Cody being a local guy that grew up, near Minneapolis, wanted to play in front of his family. And, he just became a guy that, fans resonated with because, he's a hometown kid. And then Jah, he just was someone that, fell in love with Minnesota. He grew up in Connecticut and ended up coming to Minneapolis and finding that, he liked everything that it had to offer, and, felt like over time it was a place where he could, develop his skills. And, early on in the recruiting process, there's a lot of change. At one point, they had a defensive line coach change. They had no defensive line coach actively recruiting him late in the game. So PJ Fleck, the head coach, was actually like handling the recruiting process to close the deal with Jah late because the defensive line coach left pretty late in the process, and then Jah just, ended up from there finding that he liked Minnesota and never left. So that's kind of how it shook out for him.
That's pretty cool. That's a really cool story. And we'll close out with this, Daniel. I don't know if you saw the draft when it actually happened, but when Cody was selected, number 222 overall, another Minnesota guy actually made the selection. Ryan Hogue, who was drafted Mr. Irrelevant back in 2003 by the Raiders, made that selection, shouted out the Gophers because, again, Minnesota to Minnesota. I don't know if you noticed that, but how cool was that, especially since Cody is a Minnesota guy as well?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It played at Washburn and Gustavus Adolphus, and then have, Cody Lindenberg get selected. It's pretty wild that the world lined up that way. It just, the stars aligned, I guess. And I liked what the Raiders did with their draft. I think Spytek and Carroll, you see their fingerprints all over it, addressing the offensive line, filling in with, players like, Cody Lindenberg in a position they needed later in the draft, and obviously getting Genty, who can be kind of the core of setting up their run game. And, Chip Kelly, I'm just excited to see what he does with their offensive scheme. It's going to really be centered around a run game and play action, and it's going to be fun to see how they do this year.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We're all fired up, and it's only May. It's only May 14th. We can't wait. The schedule drops later on this afternoon, but we can't wait to see what these games look like for every reason that you just mentioned. Daniel House, Triple G right there, Golden Gophers Guru, talking all things Minnesota Gophers, the football program there. Collegiately does a fine job, man. My guys got Minnesota covered like a glove, and you heard all things about Jah Joyner, a guy who had a lot of production as an edge rusher there in Minnesota. So he's going to have to find his way. The Raiders signed 15 undrafted free agents, drafted 11 guys. They are going to have the potential to have a very young team in 2025 and beyond. And that's what John Spytek, the Raiders GM, that's what he was a part of in Tampa Bay. So it's not like this is some uncharted territories or he's swimming in some waters that he's never been in before. Like, he knows this. He's been there, done that, knows what it looks like. And remember, Tampa Bay, right after Tom Brady won that Super Bowl there, and all of a sudden that team got flipped upside down and Tom Brady retired. That ended up being the youngest team out there, with most of the guys being homegrown out there producing at a very high rate. So that's what they're trying to hope to do with this Raiders squad led by John Spytek and also Pete Carroll. So that's going to do it for today's show as our Best Of series continues and rolls on. Not even sure which way we'll dive, what direction we'll go on tomorrow's show. You'll just have to tune in and find out. How about that? That's the ultimate tease. Tune in and find out. That's what we'll do as the Best Of series rolls on. And Raider Nation, we always appreciate you chiming into the show, checking in on the show whenever you get the opportunity. Of course, as always, big ups to my man Ari doing a fantastic job behind the scenes. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.